remember what that page looked in the book?
Yes.
Okay, so what I want you to do is, if you can't put that in, to replicate that to the jury and tell them what it means.
Sure.
Okay, do you want to take them one at a time?
Yes, I will.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So talking about shotgun wounds to the body and trying to figure out what the range of fire is. A perfect circle, which I'm not a great artist, but let's just say that's a perfect circle. That means that the end of the barrel, right, nice circle, is pressed up against the skin. Now this would be down here on the abdomen where you have leeway, it would end up being a perfect circle. If you have it up where it's going up against something firm, then you would have the circle, but you'd have the splitting from that buildup of pressure. So this is a contact range. If we have some burning around it, contact range or close range. If we have soot around it, we're close range. Now, from the first picture that we looked at, all those pellets coming, and then they start to slowly open up. So now what we've got is sort of looks like a cloud, right? We call it scalloped margins. So now we're moving out a little bit further. We are, in that area of maybe 2 to 3 feet or so. And then as we continue moving further and further, we get the scallop margins, but then we get holes, and it doesn't have to be perfectly around it, but we get holes from the individual pellets that have now moved out. And so if we start seeing individual pellets, we're saying usually the end of the weapon is 4 feet or further. And then to be more specific, is it 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet? Then you have to test fire.
Okay, so so as the muzzle gets closer to the wound, there either is no spreading of the pellets as in a contact wound, but the further away the pellets begin to expand, and the further away you get more of an individualized pellet pattern.
That's correct. It's like when it comes out, it comes out and it goes triangular. So it gets bigger, and as it goes triangular, it's almost like playing pool. And you take the cue ball and you hit the pool balls, the billiards, and they start to open up.
Okay, if you put up, is Defense Exhibit 162 in evidence? Okay, well, let me show it. You need to write on this book. While she's doing that, let me push this out of the way. Stirrers are going to be blocked from seeing. Is everything off over there? Please. What? Oh. Offer this into evidence, Your Honor. Without objection, and ask it be sealed.
It says state. Submit it without objection.
Put it up on the screen, please. Okay, now, here we see, and if there's measurements here, a rather large wound on his shoulder, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then a smaller wound in his chin.
Yes, sir.
What does that tell you about the directionality?
Well, it's not just that. It's also that we have no surrounding individual pellets, pellet holes. To me, looking at this is not going left to right. I can understand the thought that maybe it was like a tangential graze, but then the pellets wouldn't have gone down and they would have opened up onto the left chin. So again, using the totality of the evidence, these are pellets that are coming down from the top. they're starting to open up. They go through here, and they have to go through another bone, so they're going to open up further and disperse through the left shoulder.
So, and maybe this is too simplistic, do shotgun wounds, do they, and of course, if you just testified, they expand, right? The pattern.
You'll get a different pattern, and for a certain distance, the actual hole will expand, but then you lose that hole, and it becomes just individual small holes.
So you've got a smaller hole in his chin and a larger hole in his shoulder. Does that indicate anything? I mean, am I being too simplistic? Smaller means it's expanding at that point?
Right. Not to be offensive, I think it is a little too simplistic because we also have to look at what's around the wound. But yes, again, the totality of everything, this is definitely coming downwards from right to left. The only way I could see larger wound on the left shoulder, smaller wound on the left chin is if you consider this a graze wound. But again, using the totality of everything, the size of this wound, the location of the pellets going down into the shoulder, this is not going left to right.
Okay. Now, let me also ask you this. If the wound is in the head, and why isn't the brain macerated? Why isn't the brain shredded by those pellets? Why does the brain exit the skull, as we saw a minute ago, without being shot to pieces?
Because, again, you're having the shot shell.
Take it down.
You know, that's okay. Everything is still within that shot shell as it goes in. The pressure is just going to form around it and push it out. Sometimes you'll see, in my experience, a complete intact brain that may have some holes here and there. Sometimes you'll see a brain that is split in half, and sometimes you will see completely macerated. But from what I saw in the photograph and reading Dr. Reamer's autopsy report, she does state that the brain was received in another bag and that it was, I don't remember the exact words, but that it was severely traumatized.
But no, there's no x-rays of that brain.
There's no x-rays of the brain. I'm sure there are pellets within the brain.
And were there any shots? Do you see any actual autopsy photos of the brain? I mean, just the brain.
No, I saw scene photos, but I did not see autopsy photos of just the brain.
Okay. So you would not necessarily, well, let me back off for just a second. You have actually done autopsies on contact wounds by a shotgun to the head?
Oh, yes.
And what you're telling us is based on that experience?
Well, experience, training, the textbooks. I mean, articles aren't written about it because it's fairly common knowledge.
Okay. And let me do a little housekeeping. I got a number of photos I want to show you that may be used, or were they used by you in you reaching your opinion, okay?
Okay.
Can you come over here so I can not... Defendant's Exhibit 169, 168, 161, 160, and 159. to determine whether or not he relied on these to come to the conclusions he's come to. I don't think there's any need to publish them to the jury at this point, and I believe the state consents to their admission.
No objection.
If I might proceed. Would you look at these photos, please?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Are those photographs, autopsy photographs or x-rays, that you relied on in reaching the opinions you've expressed to this jury today?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we'd offer these into evidence.
No objection.
They're admitted.
For the record, we're offering Defendant's Exhibit 160, 161, 168, 169, and 159 and 160. I think I already said 160. Give those to you. And again, all under seal, please. So just a couple more questions. 162 is already in evidence, right? Okay. So let me hand that back to you before I do so. The opinions you've given here today, you've given to a degree of medical certainty more probably than not.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that you're not an expert on the vectors of this shot, either one of any of these shots, except you talked about a probability on Maggie on the two shots that go down, right?
Right. I want to make sure I'm answering correctly. So I'm an expert on the directionality within the body that projectiles go, entrance, exit, the direction within the body. As far as, and I think this is what you're asking, as far as crime scene and reconstructing, things of that sort, that's not my area of expertise.
Okay, but you have given an opinion. I want to make sure that we all understand what you've said. You've given an opinion that Dr. Reamer was wrong on the shot that blew Paul's brain out of his skull and it landed on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
And you believe it was a shot in the back right of the skull.
Yes, sir.
And you believe that it was going through his skull, out his neck, and into his arm.
Into the left side, yes, sir.
Left side. And we found a number of x-rays showing the pellets. We've seen forensic evidence that you, in the normal course of your work, rely on to draw opinions, right?
That's correct.
And you've done that thousands of times.
Yes, sir.
And let me make sure that the jury understands this. When you're submitted materials like we submitted to you in cases, you report, are you paid to give an opinion, a specific opinion?
No, I wouldn't accept a case if someone said this is what we want.
Okay. And you come to conclusions based on the materials given to you?
Absolutely.
And that's your conclusion here today?
The conclusions that I've stated, yes.
Beg the court's indulgence. So you've indicated and testified that it would be the blood, brains, pieces of skull, other material would blow out the direction of the hole, and the muzzle of the gun would have been pressed against the skull, correct?
The muzzle of the end of the barrel of the shotgun would
Right.
be pressed against the skin firm enough that there would be pressure onto the skull, and then you would have blowback as the skull opened up.
And that blowback would follow the barrel of the gun?
Well, it would come back up the barrel of the gun, but it would also distribute.
Right. And what about the barrel of the gun? Would there be biological material jammed into that?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there would be brains, blood, skull, whatever, jammed back up the barrel of the shotgun.
Right, what we say is biologic material.
Okay. Thank you. Please answer any questions Ms. Good has.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Eisenstat.
Good morning.
Now, when you first started your testimony, you talked a little bit about time of death.
Yes.
Is it the pathologist's job to determine the time of death?
Depends on the jurisdiction, but pathologists are trained in talking about what's consistent or what's not consistent. But I believe, like in Georgia, I believe here in South Carolina, the coroner, in the majority of counties, the coroner goes to the scene and does the investigation. So I don't know how it works here, but there's no doubt that part of a forensic pathologist's training and knowledge is determining cause of death from information given to, time of death from information given to them.
And it's not customary for a pathologist to actually go out to the crime scene, is it?
Oh, I'd say more often than not, the pathologist does not go out.
All right, and now in this case, because this appeared to be homicides, the county coroner would be the one to have requested an autopsy. Is that right?
That's my understanding. Definitely in Georgia, it's my understanding here, yes.
And Dr. Reamer performed the autopsy here,
Yes, ma'am.
and she performed an independent autopsy.
She did.
Did you perform an autopsy of either of the victims in this case?
I did not.
And you relied on, I think you testified that Dr. Reamer's report, x-rays, crime scene photos, and autopsy photos in determining your opinion.
That's correct.
And you were hired, right?
Yes, I was.
And you were here on Friday, weren't you?
I was.
So that would mean you've made over $10,000 in evaluating or taking part in this case.
At the end of the day, that's correct.
Did you do a report?
I was not asked to do a report, no.
Wouldn't you agree that a report would have been helpful to explain the scientific methods or investigation that you used to come to your conclusions?
Oh, different jurisdictions do it differently, so I have no idea how it's done here. But, my report would have been exactly the same as my testimony, so I guess it would be on paper instead of, verbally.
Well, you saw Dr. Reamer's report, and that was actually entered into evidence, right?
Yes, I did.
All right, you spoke a little bit about Maggie and
Yes, that's
her
correct.
autopsy. And I believe you said in your testimony that Maggie's shooter could be taller than Maggie. Is that right?
Oh, no, that's not what I said.
What did you say?
No, what we were talking about was if Maggie's gunshot or rifle wounds to the top of her head and to the side of her head were with her standing up, that would have to be somebody at an elevated position. So I didn't give an opinion that the shooter had to be taller because we talked about how she could be bent over.
But an elevated position could mean the shooter was taller, right?
Oh, but it could be that the shooter was taller, but that would still have to be somebody at an extremely elevated position shooting down. I'll leave it at that.
And you said that determining trajectory is not something that you do.
At the scene, that's correct. On the body, that's what I do all the time.
All right, let's move on to Paul. Would you agree that when a gun is shot, a lot of energy and momentum is generated, and that momentum and energy tears through a person's body?
Depending on the range of fire, the type of ammunition, yes, I agree with that.
And when pellets are shot, they spread out.
Eventually, yes.
Right. So, if Paul was shot in the back of the head, and those pellets start spreading out, did they come back together when they exited this way?
No, but that's where we're talking about the same thing as range of fire. So those pellets, I mean, if you go from the top of the head down to here, this is about 6 inches, so we have about 6 inches, we have maybe a foot, right, from here to here. Those pellets can still be together and starting to spread out. So no, they're not going to go out and come back together. Some, that's why I was talking about that billiard ball effect. Some, if you hit that cue ball, the side ones are going to pop out, and the middle ones will still be together. So, no, they won't go out and come back, but I have no issue with 1 foot from here to here and having still a whole cluster of pellets going through.
But the pellets would be closer together when they first enter the body.
For a certain distance, yes.
And we also talked about soot or stippling. Now, in Dr. Reamer's report, she does note that there was soot and stippling for certain injuries, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And she did not note that for the injury to the shoulder and head.
Agreed.
Okay. And wasn't the top of Paul's skull missing?
Yes, it was.
And Paul's face, it wasn't blown off, was it?
It was not.
His brains weren't splattered all over the floor?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by that, but his brain left his head and ended up being on the floor. There were some smaller pieces in other areas and then a large piece in one area.
I'm going to show you what's been entered as tapes 24 under seal. Okay, I don't know if you can tell from this picture.
I can.
Can you?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that brain look macerated or splattered everywhere?
No, but that brain has been extruded from the head, and there are, when you do a zoom in on it, unfortunately no x-ray, but when you zoom in on it, you can tell that there's injury to the brain. But the brain, yes, I agree, it's not macerated.
And there were pellets on the floor of that feed room.
That's my understanding.
I'm going to show you tapes 26 and 43. Can you see that is the door to the feed room?
I do.
And tapes 43. Is that blood spatter on top of the door?
That looks like blood spatter at the top of the door, yes.
And no blood spatter out there on the sidewalk from his brain being blown out from his head and his face being left intact, right?
Right, the brain would come out the top of the head.
And it's on the top of that door.
I'm sorry, ma'am?
And the blood spatter is on the top of the door.
Right, that's blowback. That's from here, the pressure pushing it backwards.
And did you see any crime scene photos of the feed room where there were some containers on a shelf?
I did.
So the containers on the shelf, I believe, would be to the right side on this picture.
Looking at the picture, I believe, yes, inside on the right, there's some shelves with a number of items on it.
And was there kind of a demarcation line showing blood going to the top of the feed room?
Oh, I don't recall. In all honesty, you're starting to get into an area that's not my area of expertise.
Into trajectory, is that right?
Outside of the body, yes.
And did you determine the manner of death for these victims?
I did.
And what was that?
For both of them, it was homicide.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anything further?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you.